The notification sound from Donovan's phone cut through the steam of our luxury hotel bathroom like a knife. Counting down the hours until I can taste you again, my love. This wife charade is torture, D. I stood frozen, his iPhone still warm in my trembling hands, reading words that shattered 15 years of marriage in a single breath. The text was meant for someone called Serafina, sent while my husband showered just feet away, preparing for our anniversary dinner at the most exclusive restaurant in Tuscany. Let me see how she handles the real world alone, Donovan had laughed to his friends just hours later after I confronted him in the hotel lobby, his voice carrying across the marble floors as other guests turned to stare. 15 years of being pampered, let's see what she's actually made of. The Maserati rental disappeared into the Tuscan hills, leaving me with nothing but the echo of his cruel laughter and €120 in emergency cash. But he never came back for me. 10 months later, when Donovan finally tracked me down in Portugal, he found something he never expected. A woman who had discovered she was made of stronger stuff than either of us had ever imagined. Before we begin, I want to thank each of you for joining this journey. If you're drawn to stories of women who transform betrayal into breakthrough, consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps support more stories of resilience and rebirth. Now let's witness how one abandoned wife turned devastating betrayal into the foundation of her freedom. I should have seen the signs. The late nights that stretched later, the new cologne that wasn't for me, the way Donovan's eyes had grown distant even when he was looking directly at me. But when you've spent 8 years slowly shrinking yourself to fit someone else's idea of the perfect wife, you learn to ignore the uncomfortable truths that threaten your carefully constructed peace. Our 15th anniversary trip to Tuscany was supposed to be a renewal, a chance to reconnect after what Donovan called my midlife restlessness, my gentle suggestions about maybe returning to art therapy, about feeling lost in our cavernous house in Westchester. Why complicate things, Yolanda? He'd said, booking the most expensive resort he could find. Let me remind you how good we have it. The Castello di Casole suited his taste perfectly. Opulent, exclusive, designed to impress. I tried to match his enthusiasm as we toured wine cellars and dined on terraces overlooking rolling vineyards, but something felt hollow about his sudden attentiveness. The expensive gifts, the public displays of affection, the constant phone calls he claimed were urgent business, it all felt like performance. That morning, while he showered before our planned wine tour, his phone buzzed insistently on the marble vanity. The screen lit up with message after message from S, each one more intimate than the last. 2 years of messages. 2 years of I love you and can't wait to be together, and detailed plans for a future that didn't include me. The shower was still running when I scrolled back to the beginning, my heart shattering with each revelation. Serafina from his marketing team. 28 years old, ambitious, everything I apparently wasn't anymore. Their affair had started during a business conference in Miami, continued through countless late meetings, and intensified during every trip he'd claimed was solo business travel. You going to stand there all day? Donovan's voice made me jump. He emerged from the shower, towel wrapped around his waist, reaching for his phone. Our eyes met in the mirror as my expression registered what I'd discovered. For a moment, silence stretched between us like a wire about to snap. Then his face hardened with something I'd never seen before, not shame or regret, but irritation at being caught. How long? I whispered. How long what, Yolanda? How long have you been snooping through my private communications? The deflection hit me like a physical blow. How long with Serafina? He sighed, as if I was being deliberately difficult. 2 years. And before you get dramatic, it doesn't change anything between us. You have everything you need, the house, the lifestyle, the status. Why do you need to complicate it? I stared at this stranger wearing my husband's face. Complicate it. Donovan, you're having an affair. I'm having my cake and eating it too, he said with brutal honesty. Something you'd understand if you hadn't gotten so comfortable. When was the last time you challenged yourself, Yolanda? When was the last time you took a real risk? The cruelty was breathtaking. I'd given up my therapy practice for him, abandoned my friendships when he complained they were too demanding, shaped myself into the perfect pharmaceutical executive's wife. And now he was using my compliance against me. I want a divorce, I heard myself say. His laugh was sharp and dismissive. With what money? With what skills? You haven't worked in 8 years, you have no independent income, and your name isn't on any of our major assets. You'd get enough to rent a studio apartment and work at Target for minimum wage. Is that really what you want? The calculation in his voice terrified me more than his infidelity. This wasn't a moment of passion or a marriage crisis. This was a man who had systematically trapped me and was now enjoying my helplessness. That evening at dinner, surrounded by other wealthy couples celebrating their own milestones, Donovan played the role of devoted husband with nauseating perfection. He ordered for me, told charming stories that painted me as delightfully helpless, and occasionally squeezed my hand while making eye contact that dared me to cause a scene. To 15 wonderful years, he toasted, raising his glass of Brunello di Montalcino. And to my beautiful wife, who makes every day an adventure. The other couples smiled and applauded. I smiled back, playing my part, while inside I felt something precious dying. This was my life, a performance where I was both actress and audience, pretending to be happy while my husband celebrated our marriage as an elaborate lie. Later, in our suite, Donovan's phone buzzed with another message from Serafina. This time he didn't hide it. She misses me, he said casually, as if discussing the weather. The conference in Barcelona next month can't come soon enough. You're not even trying to hide it anymore. Why should I? You're not going anywhere, Yolanda. You don't have anywhere to go. The finality in his voice broke something inside me. I could call my sister. Rebecca. The one who told you not to quit your job. The one who said I was controlling. Go ahead. Call her. Tell her how right she was and how wrong you were. Tell her you need saving because you can't take care of yourself. I'm sure she'd love to hear that. His words found their target with surgical precision. Rebecca and I hadn't spoken in 3 years, not since she'd accused me of becoming a stranger in designer clothes. The pride that had kept me from admitting she was right now felt like prison bars. You know what might be good for you? Donovan continued, scrolling through his phone. Some time to think. Really think about what you want to throw away over a little jealousy. He moved toward our luggage, pulling out his passport and wallet. I'm going to extend my trip. Maybe visit Florence, maybe Rome. Take some time to clear my head. What about me? What about you? You're a grown woman, Yolanda. Figure it out. Maybe some independence will remind you what you have to lose. The cruelty was so casual it took my breath away. You can't just leave me here. Can't I? He pocketed the rental car keys and our shared credit cards. You wanted to talk about real life. About challenges. Here's your chance. Let's see what the former art therapist is really made of. 20 minutes later, I watched from our balcony as the Maserati pulled away from the hotel, carrying my husband toward whatever adventure awaited him. In his wake, he left a woman who had forgotten she was anything more than his reflection. I spent that night in our king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling and cycling through disbelief, rage, and a terror so complete it made me nauseous. My phone showed 17 missed calls to Donovan, all going straight to voicemail. My credit cards were cancelled. My bank account, controlled by his company's financial advisor, was inaccessible from Italy. The hotel concierge was sympathetic but clear. Without valid payment, I would need to vacate the suite by noon. My emergency cash would cover 3 nights at a modest pension in the nearby town, maybe 4 if I skipped meals. As I packed my single suitcase, I discovered Donovan had taken the jewelry he'd given me over the years. The anniversary necklace, the promotion earrings, even my wedding ring upgrade from our 10th anniversary. Only my original wedding band remained, and the small pearl earrings my grandmother had left me. The pension was exactly as desperate as it sounded. A narrow room above a wine shop with a sink in the corner and a shared bathroom down the hall. The elderly proprietor, Signora Benedetti, spoke enough English to understand my situation without requiring details. Her eyes held a mixture of pity and recognition that made me wonder how many abandoned wives had found their way to her door. Men, she said simply, handing me the key. Sometimes they forget women have backbones. That first night, sleeping on sheets that smelled of lavender and loneliness, I made a decision that would change everything. I would not call Rebecca. I would not crawl back to Donovan with apologies and promises to be a better wife. I would not return to Westchester to wait like a pet for his forgiveness. Instead, I would disappear. The next morning, I sold my grandmother's pearls to a jewelry shop near the train station. The proprietor offered me far less than they were worth, but enough to fund the next phase of a plan I was building, one desperate decision at a time. "Where to?" asked the ticket agent at the station, her English accented but clear. I studied the departure board, looking for the furthest destination from anything Donovan might think to search. "Portugal," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "The Douro Valley." Why Portugal? Maybe because it was the one country in Europe we'd never visited, the one region Donovan had dismissed as too rustic for our sophisticated palates. Maybe because the wine country promised something authentic that our marriage had lacked. Or maybe because running toward the unknown felt braver than running back to the familiar. The journey took 18 hours, trains through Florence and Rome, a bus through Spain, another bus winding into the terraced hills of the Douro Valley. With each mile, I felt the weight of my old life lifting, replaced by something I hadn't experienced in years: anticipation. I arrived in the village of Quinta do Sol as the sun was setting behind rows of grapevines that stretched to the horizon like green rivers. The small town square was anchored by a cafe, a church, and a modest pension that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1960s. The air smelled of wood smoke, bread, and something else: the sweet, earthy scent of grapes ripening in the late summer heat. My Portuguese was limited to obrigada and poor favor, but the pension owner's wife seemed to understand my situation with the universal language of exhaustion and defeat. She showed me to a small room with whitewashed walls and a narrow bed, pointing to the shared facilities down the hall with gentle encouragement. That night, I lay listening to unfamiliar sounds: church bells marking the hour, voices calling in Portuguese, the distant sound of harvest songs from the vineyards. For the first time since discovering Donovan's betrayal, I felt something approaching peace. But peace, I was about to learn, sometimes comes just before the storm. The next morning, I woke with ambitious plans to explore the village, maybe find work, perhaps even send a postcard to Rebecca with a carefully edited version of my adventure. Instead, I made it exactly half a mile up a vineyard path before my body and spirit finally surrendered to the trauma of the past week. The Portuguese sun was merciless, the dusty path unfamiliar, and my designer sandals completely inappropriate for hiking. Dehydration, exhaustion, and emotional shock conspired to send me tumbling into the red earth between rows of ancient grapevines. I came to with gentle hands turning me over, an elderly woman's voice speaking rapid Portuguese with unmistakable concern. When I opened my eyes, a weathered face framed by silver hair smiled down at me, her brown eyes crinkled with worry and kindness. "Agua," she said, pressing a plastic bottle to my lips. The water was warm but tasted like salvation. She introduced herself as Esperança Santos, pointing to herself repeatedly until I managed to whisper my own name. Esperança nodded as if she'd been expecting me, then called out to someone named Tomás. An elderly man appeared between the vines, his face carved by decades of sun and honest work. Brother and sister, I learned later, united by the death of his wife years ago and the emigration of their children to places like Canada and Australia. The vineyard was their shared inheritance and shared burden, too much work for two people in their 70s but too precious to abandon. They helped me to my feet with surprising strength, Esperança chattering in Portuguese while Tomás studied me with curious eyes. Despite the language barrier, their kindness was unmistakable as they guided me slowly up the hill toward a stone farmhouse that looked like it had grown from the earth itself. The kitchen welcomed me with the scent of herbs hanging from wooden beams and something savory bubbling on an ancient stove. Esperança settled me at a scrubbed wooden table while Tomás disappeared and returned with basic medical supplies. They cleaned my scraped palms and knees with gentle efficiency, their concern transcending the need for shared words. Over simple soup and fresh bread, I attempted to explain my situation through gestures, tears, and the few Portuguese words I could manage. Esperança nodded as if she understood completely, occasionally asking questions that Tomás translated through a mixture of Spanish and broken English. They offered me their spare room without hesitation, a simple space with whitewashed walls, a narrow bed covered by a handmade quilt, and a view of terraced vineyards rolling toward the river. Too exhausted to protest or overthink their kindness, I accepted gratefully. That night, sleeping between sheets that smelled of lavender and honest work, I had the first peaceful sleep I'd experienced since discovering Donovan's betrayal. Morning arrived with roosters crowing and the aroma of fresh bread wafting from the kitchen below. I found clean clothes folded at the foot of my bed, simple cotton pants and a work shirt that had belonged to their daughter Sophia, who now lived in Toronto with grandchildren Esperança and Tomas saw only in photographs. The clothes hung loosely on my frame but felt more comfortable than any designer outfit I'd owned. In the kitchen, Esperança beamed at my appearance, immediately serving strong coffee and bread with honey from their own hives. Through gestures and the translation app on my phone, I tried to explain my gratitude and my intention to move on, not wanting to impose on their kindness. Esperança's face fell immediately. She shook her head vigorously, pointing outside where rain now pattered against the windows, then to my still blistered feet. "Fica," she insisted. One of the first Portuguese words I learned. "Stay." Over the following days, I made several attempts to leave, each met with gentle resistance from my unexpected hosts. Once, with my bag packed and shoes on, Esperança intercepted me at the door. She led me to a small wooden box on the mantel, opening it to reveal photographs. Her fingers trembled as she pointed to a young woman with Esperança's eyes and Tomas's smile. "Sophia," she said softly, then pointed far away. "Canada." She made a cradling motion with her arms, then showed me a recent photo of a baby I couldn't meet. I understood then. Esperança saw in me a substitute for her absent daughter, a presence to fill the hollow space left behind. Rather than feeling manipulated, my heart ached for her loss. I nodded slowly and returned my bag to its place by the door. What followed was an education I never could have imagined. Each morning, Esperança woke me before dawn to join her in the vineyard. She taught me to identify the different grape varieties by their leaves, how to test for ripeness by feel and taste, when to thin the clusters for maximum flavor concentration. My hands, soft from years of manicures and moisturizers, quickly developed calluses and cuts from the vines. Esperança treated each injury with homemade salves and gentle teasing about American princess hands. But she also praised my progress with genuine enthusiasm as I learned to move through the rows without damaging the precious fruit. Tomas took charge of my education in the technical aspects of winemaking. The old stone building that housed their equipment fascinated me. Everything from crushing to fermentation happened in the same space where Tomas's grandfather had made wine a century ago. The processes were largely unchanged, relying on knowledge passed down through generations rather than modern technology. "Taste," Tomas would say, offering me samples from different barrels. At first, all the wine tasted roughly the same to me, grape juice in various stages of transformation. But gradually, my palate began to develop. I started detecting subtle differences in flavor, acidity, tannins. To my surprise, Tomas began seeking my opinion on blending decisions. My untrained palate seemed to detect harmonies and imbalances that even surprised him. "Natural gift," he said one afternoon, nodding approvingly after I correctly identified which barrel would benefit from more time aging. Evenings were for language lessons around their small television, Esperança patiently correcting my pronunciation while Tomas dozed in his chair. Portuguese began replacing English in my thoughts as I dreamed in my new language, woke with Portuguese words on my lips. My body changed on this regimen of physical work and simple food. The softness I'd cultivated through years of gym memberships and careful dieting was replaced by functional strength. My complexion, once maintained through expensive creams and treatments, glowed from honest sweat and olive oil soap. When I caught sight of myself in the small bathroom mirror, a stranger looked back, tanned, lean, somehow more solid despite weighing less. 3 months into my new life, Esperança approached me as we sorted grapes at the long wooden table under their pergola. She studied my face with the careful attention she gave to her vines, then spoke slowly in Portuguese mixed with the English words she'd been learning. "Yolanda," she said, using the Portuguese pronunciation that made my name sound like music. "You want, go home America." The question pierced me unexpectedly. Home. The word conjured our Westchester house with its perfect rooms and empty conversations. It also brought Gabriel into sharp focus, a pain that had dulled but never disappeared. Tears spilled down my cheeks as I tried to explain. I told her about Donovan's betrayal, about years of slowly disappearing into his shadow, about the humiliation of being abandoned like unwanted luggage. Esperanza listened without understanding the words but absorbing the emotions behind them. When I finished, she pointed to her heart, then to the vineyard around us, and finally to me. The message was clear. I had a place here if I wanted it. Trabalho, I said carefully, using the word for work while mimicking Tomás tending the vines. I stay. I work. Esperanza's smile bloomed like sunrise over the Douro. She nodded, squeezing my hand as if we'd just agreed to something as simple as tomorrow's weather rather than a complete redirection of my life. My decision to stay marked the beginning of my true education in wine. Tomás began teaching me not just the physical processes but the business side, record keeping, quality standards, the relationships with buyers and distributors that kept small vineyards like theirs viable. Their methods were traditional but their records were ancient, handwritten ledgers and basic spreadsheets their grandson had set up during a holiday visit years before. Seeing an opportunity to contribute beyond physical labor, I spent evenings updating their systems, creating digital records that made inventory and sales tracking simpler. Look, I showed Esperanza one night, demonstrating how to filter the data to show which wine varieties sold best at different markets. Her eyes widened as patterns emerged from the numbers. Intelligent, she nodded approvingly. Boston lady brain good for business. With their blessing, I began implementing small marketing improvements. Our hand-labeled bottles received updated designs with information about flavor profiles and food pairings. I created a simple brochure about their traditional methods, answering the questions tourists frequently asked when they stopped to buy wine directly from the vineyard. Word spread through the village about the American woman learning Portuguese wine traditions. The local doctor, Dr. Beatriz Ferreira, began stopping by for conversations that helped improve my language skills while satisfying her curiosity about my story. The village priest, Father Miguel, invited me to join the church committee planning the Autumn Harvest Festival. Most unexpectedly, Hugo Carvalho, the master cooper who repaired Tomás's aging barrels, began teaching me the ancient craft of barrel making. Working with Wood reminded me of the art therapy I'd abandoned years ago. The same focus on texture, patience with imperfection, satisfaction in creating something beautiful and functional with my hands. My integration into village life accelerated when Dr. Beatriz suggested I help with the children's art program at the community center. My rusty Portuguese improved rapidly as I worked with enthusiastic young artists, and my dormant therapy skills proved valuable in helping shy children express themselves creatively. 8 months into my new life, I attended the wedding of the baker's daughter, my first formal village celebration. Standing in the small church, watching the community gather to celebrate new beginnings, I felt a lump in my throat at how thoroughly I'd been accepted. After the ceremony, Father Miguel approached me with a warm smile. "You bring new life to old traditions," he said in careful English learned during seminary years in Coimbra. "Good for village. Young people leave for Lisbon, for other countries. Village needs new blood." His acceptance felt like receiving citizenship in a country I'd chosen rather than one I'd been born into. That evening, as the celebration continued in the village square with traditional music and local wine, I found myself dancing with Hugo Carvalho and laughing with Dr. Beatriz about my latest Portuguese grammar mistakes. For the first time since discovering Donovan's betrayal, I realized I'd gone an entire day without thinking about my old life. The feeling was both liberating and terrifying. 6 months later, my growing confidence in Portuguese allowed me to truly understand when Esperanza and Tomás called me to their kitchen table for what they termed important business discussion. They'd spread legal documents across the wooden surface, partnership agreements written in Portuguese with English translations. My name appeared alongside theirs as 1/3 owner of Quinta do Sol. "We are old," Esperanza said simply. 71 and 74 years. No children here. Sophia not coming back. She gestured toward the photos of her daughter's Canadian life. "You learn fast, work hard, love the vines like family. Business should be yours too." The generosity overwhelmed me. These people had taken me in as a broken stranger and were now offering me a foundation to build upon, not charity, but earned recognition of my contributions and commitment. But I don't have money to invest, I protested. I can't contribute capital to the partnership. Tomas waved away my concerns. You contribute work, ideas, future, money. He made a dismissive gesture. Money we have enough. Dreams, energy, new thinking, this we need. I signed the papers with hands that trembled, understanding that this moment marked not just a business arrangement but a complete transformation of identity. I was no longer Donovan's abandoned wife recovering from betrayal. I was a partner in a Portuguese vineyard, a member of a community that valued my contributions. That night, I placed the partnership agreement in the small wooden box where I kept my most precious possessions: photos from harvest celebrations, letters from village children in my art classes, the first cork from a bottle of wine I'd helped create from grape to glass. I also kept Donovan's abandoned wedding ring, though not for sentimental reasons. It served as a reminder of the woman I'd been and a symbol of the life I'd escaped. Sometimes I would hold it and remember the trapped feeling of being someone else's reflection rather than my own person. The ring also reminded me that someday, I would need to formally end my marriage. But Portugal had given me time to heal, to discover my strengths, to build a new life from authentic foundations. When the time came to face Donovan again, I would meet him as an equal rather than a dependent. I had no idea that time would come much sooner than expected. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was updating our vineyard's social media presence, something that would have horrified the old Yolanda but energized the new one. Dr. Beatriz had helped me set up accounts showcasing our traditional methods and the stunning beauty of our terraced vineyards. Tourism bookings were increasing steadily as wine lovers discovered our authentic approach. My laptop chimed with a notification from my long-neglected personal email account. Most messages were spam or automated reminders, but one sender name made my blood freeze. Donovan McCoy, with the subject line, "I know where you are." Heart pounding, I opened it. Yolanda, it's taken 10 months and considerable expense, but I've finally tracked you to that backwater vineyard in Portugal. This ridiculous disappearing act has gone on long enough. I'm coming to collect you and end this embarrassing episode. My flight lands in Porto tomorrow at 3 p.m. Be ready to leave. I won't be staying long in whatever primitive conditions you've been living in. D. The casual arrogance of his tone transported me instantly back to our Tuscan hotel room, to the moment he'd decided to abandon me for sport. But this time, reading his words didn't trigger panic or helplessness. Instead, I felt something I'd never experienced in 15 years of marriage: anticipation for a confrontation. Esperanza found me staring at the laptop screen, my expression unreadable. "Bad news from America?" she asked in Portuguese, her intuition as sharp as always. "Donovan," I managed. "He's coming here. Tomorrow." Her eyes narrowed slightly, the same expression she wore when examining grapes for signs of disease. She reached beneath the account ledgers spread across our kitchen table and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across to me. "Perfect timing," she said. I was waiting for the right moment. Inside were the partnership documents we'd signed months ago, but now officially registered with Portuguese authorities. I was legally 1/3 owner of Quinta do Sol, with all rights and responsibilities that entailed. "You choose what happens tomorrow," Esperanza said firmly, tapping the papers. "You have home here, business here, friends here." She pointed to my laptop displaying Donovan's message. "That man, he no longer decides." The truth of her words settled over me like armor. For the first time since receiving his email, I smiled. The following evening, I was in our processing facility testing wine samples when the unfamiliar sound of an expensive rental car broke the peaceful quiet of harvest season. Through the open doors, I watched a silver BMW navigate our narrow dirt road with obvious difficulty, urban suspension struggling with rural reality. Donovan emerged from the car wearing clothes I recognized from countless business trips: perfectly pressed chinos, designer polo shirt, Italian leather loafers completely unsuited for vineyard terrain. His hair was styled with the same precision he'd always maintained, and he wore the expression of a man confident in his ability to control any situation. He surveyed our modest stone buildings with visible distaste, his nose wrinkling at the scent of fermenting grapes and honest work. When his eyes found me through the facility's doorway, shock registered across his features like physical impact. Gone was the carefully maintained woman he'd married. My hair hung in a simple braid down my back, streaked lighter by months of sun. My arms were tan and strong from physical labor, my hands bearing the permanent stains of grape juice and earth. I wore work clothes, sturdy pants and a cotton shirt that belonged to this life rather than the performance I'd abandoned. "My God, Yolanda," he said, stepping carefully around a puddle. "What happened to you?" "I grew up," I replied, setting down my testing glass and walking toward him with steady steps. "What are you doing here, Donovan?" He spread his arms in a gesture meant to be welcoming but landing closer to condescending. "I've come to take you home, obviously. This little adventure has gone on long enough, don't you think?" Behind me, I heard Esperanza and Tomas emerge from the house, positioning themselves within sight but giving us space for what they recognized as a necessary confrontation. "Adventure?" I echoed. "Is that what you call abandoning your wife in a foreign country?" His expression hardened slightly, the charm slipping. "That was a mistake, I'll admit. I was angry, I'd been drinking, and I reacted poorly to your dramatics about Serafina. But come on, Yolanda. You've made your point. It's time to be adults about this." The casual dismissal of his cruelty as reacting poorly might have devastated the old me. Instead, it clarified exactly how much I'd changed. "How did you find me?" "Private investigator. Cost me a fortune, but I couldn't have people asking questions forever about where my wife had disappeared to. It looks..." He searched for the right words. "Bad for your image," I finished. "Same as it ever was." "Bad for our image," he corrected. "Our life together. 15 years of marriage, Yolanda. Our beautiful home, our social connections, the life we built." "The life you built," I countered. "The one where I gradually became a prop in your success story. Tell me, Donovan, how's Serafina?" His jaw tightened. "That's over. She left the company. Left me, actually, for someone younger and more available. Turns out she wasn't interested in being a secret forever." Despite everything, I felt a stab of satisfaction at his obvious pain. "I'm sorry that happened to you." "Are you? Because you could help me fix it. Come home, Yolanda. I need..." He stopped, as if the words physically hurt. "I need you." For 15 years, hearing those words from Donovan would have been the answer to my prayers. Now they sounded like manipulation, desperation wrapped in familiar phrases designed to trigger my old responses. "You need me for what? To manage your social calendar? To smile at your colleagues' wives? To pretend our marriage is something it never was?" "I need my wife," he said, his voice carrying the edge of command that used to make me scramble to comply. "I need the life we had, the stability, the partnership." "Partnership?" I laughed, surprising both of us with its genuine amusement. "We were never partners, Donovan. I was your employee, your accessory, your audience. But never your partner." I gestured toward the vineyard around us, toward Esperanza and Tomas who watched our confrontation with protective concern. "This is partnership. Equal investment, shared risks, mutual respect." His eyes followed my gesture, taking in the modest buildings, the elderly couple, the evidence of physical labor that surrounded us. "This. Yolanda, be serious. You're living like a peasant, working manual labor, for what? A few dollars from grape sales." "For purpose," I said simply. "For belonging. For the satisfaction of creating something beautiful with my own hands." You can create beautiful things at home. Redecorate the house. Start that interior design business you used to talk about. I won't stop you anymore. The offer might have tempted the woman who'd discovered his betrayal in that Italian hotel. But that woman had died in the vineyards of Portugal, replaced by someone who understood the difference between permission and power. "You never had the right to stop me in the first place." His face flushed with frustration. "Fine. We'll get counseling. I'll change. I'll be more attentive. More considerate. Whatever you need." "I needed you not to abandon me in Italy. I needed you not to have a 2-year affair. I needed you to see me as more than a reflection of your success. I reached into my pocket and pulled out an envelope. I needed you to be someone you're not. What is that? Divorce papers. Filed in Portuguese court with provisions for division of assets. It's over, Donovan. He stared at the envelope as if it might explode. You can't be serious. You'd throw away everything for this. He gestured dismissively at our modest surroundings. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm choosing something better. Better. Look around, Yolanda. Look at yourself. You're sunburned, you smell like manual labor, you're living in a third-world village with people who probably don't even have indoor plumbing. His words would have devastated me once. Now they only revealed how little he'd ever understood about strength, beauty, or worth. I'm healthier than I've been in 15 years. I'm learning skills that connect me to centuries of tradition. I'm part of a community that values my contributions rather than my appearance. I stepped closer, meeting his eyes directly. And I'm happy, Donovan. Genuinely happy, for the first time since before I married you. This is insane, he said, but his voice cracked slightly. You're having some kind of breakdown. Come home, get some therapy, and we can work through this together. I don't need therapy to recover from finding myself. I need you to sign these papers and let me live the life I've chosen. Tomás approached then, saying something in Portuguese that I didn't need to translate. The sun was setting, the mountain roads were dangerous at night, and Donovan should leave soon if he wanted to reach Porto safely. What did he say? Donovan asked. He said the road to Porto is treacherous after dark. You should leave now to reach the city before nightfall. Donovan looked between us, finally registering that this wasn't a negotiation. He wasn't rescuing me or collecting his property. He was saying goodbye to a life that no longer included him. You'll regret this, he said, but the threat sounded hollow. When the novelty wears off and you're still hauling grapes at 60, you'll remember what you gave up. Maybe, I conceded. But I'd rather risk regret from choices I made than live with the certainty of regret from choices made for me. His face cycled through emotions, anger, disbelief, and finally something that looked almost like grief. The woman I married wouldn't have done this. No, I agreed. She wouldn't have. She was too afraid, too dependent, too convinced she couldn't survive without you. But that woman died in Italy when her husband drove away laughing. The woman standing here chose to live. Donovan took the divorce papers with shaking hands, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. You're really going to stay here? In this place? I looked around at the stone buildings glowing golden in the setting sun, at the terraced vineyards rolling toward the river, at Esperança and Tomás who had given me not just shelter but purpose. This place saved my life. And what about your real life? Our house, our friends, everything we built together. Keep the house. As for our friends. I paused, remembering the careful dinner parties where I'd performed the role of perfect wife while slowly disappearing inside. They were always more yours than ours. He climbed back into his rental car, the divorce papers clutched against his chest like a wound. Through the open window, he made one last attempt. I could fight this. Contest the divorce, freeze the assets, make things very difficult for you. You could try, I said calmly. But I'm no longer the woman who was afraid of your threats. I have Portuguese legal counsel now, community support, and most importantly, I have nothing left to lose. Everything I need is right here. The truth of those words seemed to deflate his remaining fight. He started the engine and began backing carefully down our narrow road. As his taillights disappeared around the bend, I felt no triumph, no vindication, just profound relief that a chapter of my life had finally, officially ended. Esperança appeared at my elbow, pressing a glass of our finest wine into my hands. He looks smaller than I expected, she said in Portuguese. I laughed, surprising myself with the sound. He always was. I just couldn't see it from inside his shadow. That evening, the three of us sat on the small terrace overlooking our vineyard, sharing a simple dinner and the comfortable silence of people who understand each other without need for constant words. As darkness fell and stars appeared over the Douro Valley, I realized this was what contentment felt like, not the desperate happiness I'd chased in my marriage, but the quiet satisfaction of a life lived authentically. 3 months after Donovan's visit, I received an envelope from his attorney in New York. The divorce had been finalized, the assets divided according to Portuguese law, which proved more generous to abandoned spouses than he'd anticipated. Along with the legal documents came a bank transfer that would have seemed modest compared to our old lifestyle but represented true independence, enough to expand our wine operation, invest in better equipment, maybe even purchase the small cottage down the hill that had recently come up for sale. More importantly, the papers included documentation that I was now legally free to marry again, though the idea seemed as foreign as my old life in Westchester. I had learned to be complete on my own, to find purpose in work and community rather than in reflecting someone else's ambitions. Dr. Beatrice found me reading the divorce decree on our terrace the next morning. "Good news or complicated news?" she asked, settling beside me with her morning coffee. "Freedom," I said simply. "Official, legal, absolute freedom." She nodded approvingly. "And what will you do with it?" I gestured toward our vineyard, where Tomas was already moving between the rows checking for signs of the harvest that would begin in another month. "Live it." The autumn harvest that year marked exactly 1 year since my arrival at Quinta do Sol. Village friends gathered to help with the picking, as tradition demanded, Hugo Carvalho with his sons, Dr. Beatrice with her teenage daughters, Father Miguel blessing the vines before we began the sacred work of gathering the fruit. As we worked under the warm September sun, I found myself thinking about the woman who had collapsed between these same rows 12 months earlier. She had been broken, abandoned, convinced of her own helplessness. The transformation felt less like change and more like archaeology, uncovering the person I'd always been beneath layers of other people's expectations. Yolanda, called Sofia Ribeiro, the baker's daughter whose wedding I'd attended months earlier. She was now pregnant with her first child and glowing with the particular beauty of women who know they're loved completely. "Come taste this cluster, I think it's perfect." I made my way to her side, accepting the grapes she offered. The sweetness burst across my palate with the complexity I'd learned to identify, hints of earth and sunshine, the mineral notes that came from our particular soil, the perfect balance of sugar and acid that would create exceptional wine. "Beautiful," I agreed. "This will be our best vintage yet." The words carried weight beyond their literal meaning. This would indeed be our wine, not just Esperança and Tomas's creation that I'd helped with, but the first vintage where I'd been involved from pruning through harvest, where my developing palate had contributed to crucial blending decisions, where my marketing efforts had already secured buyers excited to taste the results. That evening, after the day's harvest had been delivered to our processing facility, the entire village gathered in the square for the traditional celebration. Long tables appeared loaded with local specialties, fresh bread, aged cheese, grilled sardines, and wine from various local producers. Children ran between the tables while their parents shared stories from the vineyards and planned for the weeks of harvest still ahead. I sat between Esperança and Hugo Carvalho, my Portuguese now fluent enough to follow the rapid conversations flowing around me. These people had become more than friends, they were family in the truest sense, chosen rather than inherited, bound together by shared work and mutual respect rather than obligation. "Speech," called out Senhor Costa, the village mayor, raising his glass toward me. "Our American friend should tell us what she's learned in her first year among the vines." The table erupted in encouraging shouts and applause. A year ago, the attention would have terrified me. Now, I stood with confidence born from months of contribution and acceptance. I began in Portuguese, my accent still noticeable but my meaning clear, that sometimes what looks like an ending is actually a beginning. When I arrived here, I thought I was running away from my life. Instead, I was running toward it. Esperança squeezed my hand as approving murmurs rippled through the crowd. I learned that the most beautiful things require patience, good wine, strong friendships, deep roots in community. I learned that hands were made for creating, not just for being decorated. And I learned that home isn't a place you're born into, but a place where you choose to plant yourself and grow. The applause was warm and sustained, accompanied by calls of Bem-vinda. Welcome home. Later, As the celebration wound down and families began collecting sleepy children, Father Miguel approached me with a gentle smile. "You've found your place," he observed. "Yes," I said, looking around at the village square where I'd first arrived exhausted and broken. "Though it found me first." "Perhaps," he said thoughtfully. "Or perhaps you were always meant to be here, and it just took some divine intervention to get you pointed in the right direction." I thought of Donovan's cruelty in that Italian hotel, of the private investigator's fees he'd paid to track me down, of the expensive rental car that had brought him to witness my transformation. Divine intervention with a very twisted sense of humor. Father Miguel's laughter was rich and knowing. The best kind, in my experience. As winter settled over the Douro Valley and our wine began its slow transformation in ancient barrels, I established new routines that would carry me through the quiet months. Portuguese language classes with advanced students from neighboring villages, where my improving fluency helped recent immigrants while expanding my own vocabulary. Art therapy sessions at the community center, where my rusty skills found new purpose helping elderly residents process grief and young people navigate the challenges of growing up in a changing world. Most surprisingly, I began writing, not the carefully edited social media posts I'd once crafted for Donovan's benefit, but honest accounts of transformation, of starting over, of finding strength in unexpected places. Dr. Beatriz encouraged me to submit some pieces to Portuguese lifestyle magazines, which led to my first published essay about sustainable wine tourism and cultural integration. The response was overwhelming. Letters arrived from women across Europe and beyond, sharing their own stories of reinvention after betrayal, divorce, or simply the quiet desperation of lives that no longer fit. Some asked for advice about leaving unhappy marriages, others about starting businesses in foreign countries, many simply expressing gratitude for permission to imagine different lives. "You could write a book," suggested Dr. Beatriz one evening as we reviewed yet another stack of letters. "There's clearly hunger for these stories." The idea both thrilled and terrified me. Writing had been another dream I'd abandoned during marriage, dismissed as impractical when measured against Donovan's concrete achievements in pharmaceuticals. But here in Portugal, surrounded by people who valued authentic expression over profitable conformity, the dream felt possible again. I began spending winter evenings in the small cottage I'd purchased with my divorce settlement, writing by lamplight while wind rattled the windows and rain drummed on the roof. The words came slowly at first, then in rushing floods as I excavated memories I'd buried, examined patterns I'd been too close to see, celebrated victories I'd been too modest to claim. The manuscript grew through winter and into spring, chronicling not just my own journey but the stories of other women I'd met who had transformed crisis into opportunity. Esperanca's decision to leave teaching and return to the vineyard after her husband's death. Dr. Beatriz's struggle to establish her practice in a village that had never had a female doctor. Sofia Ribeiro's choice to stay in her hometown rather than follow her husband to Lisbon's corporate world. Each story illuminated different facets of the same truth, that women possess reserves of strength they often don't discover until circumstances force them to dig deep, that community can be chosen rather than inherited, that authentic happiness requires the courage to disappoint people who prefer your smaller self. Spring brought the cycle full circle as we began pruning vines for the coming season. My hands, now permanently stained and permanently strong, moved with the confidence of experience as I shaped branches for optimal fruit production. Watching new shoots emerge from wood I'd cut, I marveled at nature's faith in renewal, its assumption that growth would always follow apparent destruction. A letter arrived that morning from a Portuguese publisher interested in my manuscript, which Dr. Beatriz had quietly submitted during one of our coffee conversations. The offer was modest but represented something I'd never had during marriage. Recognition for work that was entirely my own, income generated by my ideas rather than my performance as someone's wife. "Good news?" asked Esperanca, noting my expression as I read the contract terms. "The best kind," I said, thinking of Father Miguel's words about divine intervention. "The kind that feels like coming home." That afternoon, I walked to the spot where I'd collapsed between the vines 2 years earlier, where Esperanca and Tomás had found me and offered unconditional kindness to a broken stranger. The earth was the same red clay, the ancient vines unchanged, but the woman standing among them bore little resemblance to the one who'd fallen there. I pulled out my phone, not to check messages or social media, but to take a photo of the view that had become my daily reality. Rolling terraces stretched to the horizon, dotted with stone buildings that housed families who'd worked this land for generations and newcomers like me who'd been adopted into their rhythm. This was the view Donovan had dismissed as primitive and backward. To me, it represented everything beautiful about a life built on authentic foundations, connection to land and seasons, respect for tradition combined with openness to innovation, community that supported individual growth rather than demanding conformity. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. For a moment, old anxiety flashed through me. Could Donovan be reaching out again? But the message was from Rebecca, my estranged sister, whose number I'd forgotten I'd given to the publisher as emergency contact. Yolanda, saw your interview in the International Herald Tribune about women starting over. I'm proud of you. Call when you can. Love, R. Tears blurred my vision as I realized the interview Dr. Beatrice had arranged without telling me had somehow reached my sister across an ocean and 3 years of silence. Rebecca had been right about Donovan, right about the dangers of losing myself in marriage, right about everything I'd been too proud to acknowledge. But she'd also been wrong about one crucial thing: I hadn't needed her rescue. I'd found my own way to safety, discovered my own strength, built my own foundation for the future. The knowledge felt like a gift I could offer her when I called, proof that the sister she'd worried about had not only survived but flourished. As sunset approached, painting the vineyard golden and purple, Tomas appeared with a bottle of our wine and 3 glasses. Esperanza followed with a small wedge of local cheese and fresh bread, settling beside me on the stone wall that bordered our property. To the harvest, Tomas said, raising his glass in the traditional toast. To new beginnings, Esperanza added, her eyes twinkling. To finding home, I said, completing our ritual. The wine was exceptional, complex, balanced, carrying the mineral notes of our specific terroir and the careful attention we'd lavished on every stage of its creation. It tasted like accomplishment, like belonging, like the future I was still writing one season at a time. As stars appeared over the Douro Valley and our small celebration continued with gentle conversation in Portuguese, I thought about the woman who'd once served expensive wine at dinner parties designed to impress Donovan's colleagues. She'd poured from bottles chosen by others, hosting events planned around other people's preferences, performing graciousness while suppressing her own opinions about what tasted good or bad. This wine was different. This wine was mine, from the soil I'd helped tend to the grapes I'd helped pick to the careful blending decisions I'd participated in during cold winter evenings in the processing facility. Every sip carried the satisfaction of authentic accomplishment, of purpose aligned with effort, of beauty created rather than simply displayed. What are you thinking about? Asked Esperanza, noting my contemplative silence. How different good wine tastes when you've earned it, I said. She nodded approvingly. Everything tastes better when you've earned it. Food, friendship, freedom, especially freedom. As the evening deepened and we moved our small celebration indoors, I reflected on the unexpected mathematics of transformation. Donovan had meant to teach me a lesson about dependence, about the consequences of challenging his authority, about my inability to survive without his financial and emotional support. Instead, he'd accidentally given me the greatest gift possible: the chance to discover who I was when freed from the need to be someone else's reflection. His act of cruelty had become my liberation, his abandonment my independence, his betrayal the foundation of my authentic happiness. Sometimes the cruelest actions yield the greatest gifts. Sometimes what looks like an ending is actually the beginning of everything you were meant to become. And sometimes, the best revenge against someone who tried to make you smaller is simply growing larger than they ever imagined possible. 2 years after collapsing between ancient vines in the Portuguese countryside, I was finally, fully, authentically home. Not because someone had rescued me or forgiven me or welcomed me back, but because I had rescued myself, forgiven myself, and welcomed myself into a life worth living. The woman Donovan had abandoned in Italy was gone forever. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, rooted in community and purpose, grateful for the cruel push that had launched her toward a destiny she never could have imagined from inside the beautiful prison of her former life. As I prepared for sleep in my own cottage overlooking our vineyard, I offered a silent thank you to the universe's twisted sense of humor, to Esperanza and Tomos's unconditional kindness, to the ancient vines that had taught me about patience and renewal, and even to Donovan's betrayal that had accidentally set me free. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new growth, new opportunities to tend what I'd planted in Portuguese soil. But tonight, I was exactly where I belonged, exactly who I was meant to be, finally and forever home.